When forester Alexei, returning home through the dense Siberian forest, heard a strange sound, he couldn't have imagined where it would lead. The decision to veer off the familiar path and follow the sound seemed like a simple act of curiosity. But what he discovered in the depths of the forest and the subsequent chain of events not only tested his humanity, but also led to an incredible twist of fate that shook the entire region and made even the most hardened skeptics believe in miracles. It all began on a cool October evening when Alexei, a local forester from the small village of Cheremushki, was returning home after a long day's work. The sun was already setting, painting the sky above the majestic mountains in shades of crimson and gold. The forest was gradually sinking into twilight, and the sounds of daytime inhabitants were giving way to the mysterious rustles of nightlife. Alexei was walking along the familiar path, lost in thought, when suddenly his ears caught a strange sound. It wasn't the usual forest noise, but something like the muffled whimper of an injured animal. Alexei's heart skipped a beat. He knew well that in the forest, every sound has its meaning, and this one definitely spoke of trouble. Without hesitation, the forester turned off the path and headed towards the sound. The closer he got, the clearer the whimpering became. Finally, pushing aside the dense branches of a bush, Alexei froze in surprise and horror. Before him, a few meters away, lay a large gray wolf caught in an iron trap. Her paw was clamped between the merciless jaws of the trap, and around it were traces of desperate attempts to break free. The wolf was breathing heavily, her eyes full of pain and fear. Alexei slowly approached, trying not to make any sudden movements. He knew that even an injured animal could be dangerous, especially a predator of this size. However, as he got closer, he noticed something else: the wolf's swollen mammary glands. This could only mean one thing. Somewhere nearby, there must be wolf cubs who needed their mother. Alexei's heart clenched with compassion. He understood that if he didn't help the wolf, not only would she die, but her cubs would be doomed to starve to death. But how to help a wild and dangerous beast? The forester stood in indecision when an unexpected idea came to his mind. Having lived near the forest all his life, Alexei had learned to imitate the sounds of many animals. He decided to try calling the cubs, hoping that their appearance would help him better assess the situation. Cupping his hands around his mouth, Alexei began to howl, trying to reproduce the wolf's call as accurately as possible. His voice echoed through the forest, bouncing off trees and creating an eerie echo. A minute passed in tense anticipation, but nothing happened. Alexei was about to give up on this idea when he suddenly noticed movement in the bushes. Slowly, cautiously, 3 tiny wolf cubs emerged from the thicket. Their fur was still soft and fluffy, and their uncertain movements betrayed their young age, no more than a month old. The cubs, trembling with fear but driven by hunger, approached their mother and began to suckle greedily. Alexei watched this scene with mixed feelings of tenderness and anxiety. He understood that the wolf was too weak and might not survive until morning. Something had to be done. But what? Making a decision that many would consider insane, Alexei decided to stay in the forest for the night. He gathered some firewood, built a small fire, and settled down near the wolf family. All night he stayed awake, guarding them from possible predators and poachers. Morning found Alexei tired but full of determination. He was relieved to see that the wolf was still alive, although very weak. Her gaze, meeting the man's eyes, was filled not with aggression, but with a strange understanding. It seemed she realized that this man meant no harm to her and her cubs. Gathering his courage, Alexei slowly approached the trap. The wolf made no attempt to attack, perhaps due to weakness, or maybe genuinely trusting the man. With great effort and caution, the forester managed to pry open the cruel jaws of the trap and free the wolf's damaged paw. As soon as the wolf felt freedom, she struggled to her feet. Her movements were slow and painful, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Gathering her last strength, she quietly called the cubs and, limping, led them into the depths of the forest. Alexei watched them go with a sense of duty fulfilled, but also with concern for their future. He understood that he had done all he could, but would the wolf survive with such a serious injury? Would the cubs be able to wait until their mother was strong enough to hunt? These questions haunted him. Days, weeks, months passed. Alexei often thought about that night in the forest and the saved wolf family. He carefully watched for tracks on the forest paths, hoping to see familiar paw prints. But time went on, and the encounter did not repeat. Almost a year had passed. One day, returning through the forest on his usual route, Alexei suddenly found himself face to face with a huge brown bear. The beast, probably disturbed in its domain, growled threateningly and stood on its hind legs. Overcome with panic, Alexei started to run. He knew he couldn't outrun a bear, so in desperation, he climbed the nearest tree. However, once on the branches, he realized with horror that bears are also excellent climbers. The situation seemed hopeless. At that moment, driven by some instinct or perhaps a memory of last year's adventure, Alexei cupped his hands and began to howl, just as he had when calling the wolf cubs. He didn't understand what he was hoping for, but it was his only chance. And suddenly, as if by magic, 4 gray shadows appeared from the forest. It was the wolves, the same wolf mother and her now-grown cubs. They surrounded the bear, growling and snapping their teeth. The bear, not expecting such a turn of events, retreated and disappeared into the thicket. Alexei, still trembling from the fear he had experienced, slowly descended from the tree. The wolves stood nearby, watching him intently. In the wolf mother's eyes, he saw the same understanding as a year ago. She seemed to be saying, "We're even now." For several long moments, the man and the wolves looked at each other. Then, as if on command, the wolf pack turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving the man alone in the clearing, shaken and grateful. And although Alexei never saw that wolf family again, he knew that somewhere in the depths of the forest lived creatures who remembered his kindness and were ready to come to his aid in a difficult moment. Thus, the story of the man and the wolf became not just a legend, but a living example of how compassion and mutual assistance can create invisible but strong connections between all living beings on our planet.